Sir James Dunn was a major Canadian business icon who was instrumental in the rebirth and growth of Wawa and Sault Ste. Marie in the first half of the 20th century. James Hamlet Dunn was born in Bathurst, New Brunswick in 1874. He was an articulate and outspoken businessman with a personality that demanded respect. He lived a pretty spectacular life in my eyes, and I've been geeking out about a few details of his personal life for weeks now, so I can't wait to dive into the life of Sir James Dunn with all of you. Let's start with his significance to us here in the Sault and Wawa area. The situation at the steel plant was not great yet again. Algoma Steel went through years of ups and downs, marked by lack of strong leadership, some people say. In 1935, the company was again forced into receivership. We all know Algoma Steel was founded by Francis Clergue, and it was later taken over by Philadelphia, Pennsylvania investors after the 1903 bankruptcy. The entire city was in distress. So the mayor of Sault Ste. Marie, which would have been R.M. McMeekin, contacted Dunn via letter. Dunn was 61 at the time and took this challenge in full swing. Dunn engineered a takeover that he became the sole controlling shareholder, thereby allowing him to take the tough but necessary reorganization measures to restore profitability to the steelmaker. To accomplish this, he raised capital by negotiating bank loans, selling his beloved art collection, and taking stock instead of income. As Algoma Steel's president and chairman of its board of directors, he successfully turned it into one of the largest steel mills of the day, and for more than 20 years guided the fortunes of the company he would eventually make into one of the most profitable producers in Canada. Dunn's contribution and changes throughout these years led to significant innovations in the industry. Hematite ore was the foundation of the steel industry in 1935. It was indeed exploited in Algoma, leading to there being very little left in Wawa. Yet, a considerable amount of ore called siderite was left behind. This ore was considered to be of little commercial value at the time, but Dunn refused to accept this evaluation. He was determined to find a means of utilizing the abundant reserves that we already had. So, in early 1939, after thousands of dollars had been spent on years of experiments, a treatment that seemed hopeful evolved. It turns out that sintering ore produces a product of an ore content approximately double the original ore. Dunn was elated with the discovery and reopened Helen Mine in Wawa and had a sinter plant built in Wawa as well to process the ore. This improved blast furnace efficiency as well and soon was in demand by other steelmakers. The next innovation which Dunn developed in production at Algoma was then known as the sink float process. The need for innovation was due to the exhaustion of ore supplies at the Helen Mine. The process, which had been established at the turn of the century because of a similar exhaustion, had been tried once or twice in the U.S., but not on ore quite different, like the ore found in Victoria Mine in Sudbury. No Canadian mines have developed this technique. No large-scale equipment was available for experimentation, and so the pilot plant would be uncertain and very expensive. The gamble was a success, and Dunn pioneered yet again. It wasn't always a smooth ride collaborating with fellow businessmen and government forces, but it must have been Dunn's personality. Eventually all relationships turned around. One significant collaboration that struggled for a long time was between Dunn and E.B. Barber, the president of Algoma Central Railway. They feuded and were not speaking to each other for a while, so Dunn had to try to figure out another way to carry the sinter from the sinter plant to Michipicoten Harbor and avoid using the ACR. But it wasn't until George W. McLeod, who would become the general manager of Algoma Ore Properties, who worked with both Algoma Steel and Algoma Central Railway. He served as an intermediary between the company presidents, and they eventually reconciled. Dunn abandoned his second tramway project that he was working on to avoid Barber, and eventually signed an agreement with the Algoma Central Railway to haul his sinter from the plant to the harbor. Soon after, we see the start of the Second World War, and that brought changes in steel demand for Algoma Steel. The Canadian War effort produced a rush of business that kept the plant at capacity operations. But Dunn feared the repeat of the First World War situation, in which Algoma steelworkers were converted almost entirely into a shell-producing plant, with little ability to manufacture consumer goods after the war. He felt the inadequacy to produce a range of peacetime goods through the 1920s, with the lack of capital funds required for diversification, lay at the root of Algoma's difficulties into the Depression period. Dunn was desperately determined to prevent recurrence of the situation. His resistance to government direction became a topic of discussion at high levels of government. He was deeply hurt when he learned that his old friend, Winston Churchill, had been told that Dunn did not seem patriotic in the war effort. So after this attack, Dunn strengthened his resolve to not let the government direction threaten the future operation of Algoma Steel. He then used the government's need for steel to negotiate a deal between the company and the federal government in 1940. With the urgency for steel for the war, there was a willingness for the government to sponsor expansion. Dunn informed the government that Algoma was capable of producing 700,000 tons of raw steel per year, but had the facilities to finish only 450,000 tons. He convinced the government that a new 44-inch blooming mill and 25-inch billet mill was needed. The federal government agreed and provided the company with a loan of $4 million. The new mill rolled its first ingot on March 17, 1942. Canada's rolled steel capacity increased by 12.5% with this one 44-inch mill on the line. We began to see more changes in the city, like the Algoma Steel and Community Transportation System. We had a city streetcar, and it continued to run till October in 1941. But the Algoma Steel Company was able to purchase 12 new Ford buses that helped transport the steel plant workers to and from work. Dunn's risk-taking and forceful determination led to the success of the steel plant and strengthened our local economy during this period. Dunn was definitely acknowledged for his work. He was recognized chiefly for his 1935 rescue and subsequent 20-year presidency and proprietorship of Algoma Steel. We all know he is a Sir, and you don't just get to choose to put that in front of your name. He was knighted by who would have reigned just before Queen Elizabeth, her father, King George. It was for his service in the Great War that Dunn was knighted in 1921. Now, what did he do before working at the steel plant? What made him qualified for the role? Let's start at the beginning. James was born in what is now Bathurst, New Brunswick. His father owned a shipbuilding company whose fortunes were wiped by the sharp decline of the demand of wooden ships. His good fortunes continued to drop with the loss of his life, falling into the harbor when James was just an infant. His mom worked as a telegraph clerk, trying to make ends meet, until the Ferguson family, with a large farm, supported them by providing food and board for small household chores. Dunn grew up an eager reader with an excellent memory. So, of course, when of age, he left home to find employment. He worked as a deckhand for an American shipping company on Lake Michigan, then made his way back east and was employed by a manufacturing company in Massachusetts. It was long after that he moved back home and took a job as a clerk at a law firm, working alongside Richard Bennett, the 11th Prime Minister of Canada. Bennett led him to apply to Dalhousie University Law School in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And he did, and worked a variety of part-time jobs to pay his way through the university experience, graduating in 1898. He worked in Halifax as a lawyer until opening his own practice in Edmonton, Alberta. Soon he was drawn to the booming economy of Montreal, Quebec. He landed a position at a prominent law firm. A year after his first marriage in 1902, he established the J.H. Dunn & Co. stock brokerage company. He did so with $20,000 borrowed from his new father-in-law. And with that, he acquired a seat on the stock exchange. Canadian business at the time was still heavily dependent on investment money from the British financial markets, and Dunn became an expert at raising foreign capital for the underwriting of securities as well as selecting the right place to invest. Articulate, outspoken, and with the personality that commanded respect, Dunn had already made contacts with a number of influential people, including a number of railroad executives, one of the most powerful groups of entrepreneurs of the day. One of these men being William Van Hearn, the former president of the Canadian Pacific Railway. He also had pre-established connections to young lawyers and businessmen, which led him to even more business with elite corporate Canada. However, the London financial market was the center of the economic universe and was encouraged to move to London in 1905. There he ran a new merchant bank in partnership with the Swiss investment dealer C.L. Fisher, on top of his work with the Montreal brokerage he established. At a time of rapid development in merchandise industry, as a result of large hydroelectric projects, shrewd investments, and underwritings of stock promotions, James Dunn was soon a wealthy man. Yet everything that goes up must come down. As a director of the Sovereign Bank of Canada, the market crash in 1907 caused severe financial difficulties. To add, there was mismanagement back in his Montreal brokerage house, and a disappeared partner, leaving Dunn with a monstrous amount of debt. He did manage to dig himself out of this hole and built a castle. After several business ventures and investments, he became a millionaire. His investments are what led him to the Soo. Many of his Canadian investments were in Northern Ontario. In 1908, Dunn had partnered with a British group of investors to cooperate with an American group with the same goal, to form the Lake Superior Investment Co. The group wanted to acquire Algoma Steel. Although Dunn's role at this time was important, he was still not the majority player. And then I guess you know the rest of the story. But you may not know that Dunn was married 3 times. His first marriage was in 1901. James Dunn was married to Gertrude Patterson Price, the daughter of a Quebec City lumber dealer. They had 5 children together before divorcing in 1926. Mona was their first child and widely described as the most beautiful girl in England. Sir Philip Gordon Dunn, 2nd Baronet Dunn, was born in 1905 and lived till 1976. Kathleen Mabel Dunn was the 3rd child, born in 1907, passed away in 1969. Joan Molesworth Dunn was just a year later and passed in 1982. And Bridget Leah Dunn was born in 1919, quite a few years later than her other siblings, and passed in 1991. Dunn's second marriage was to Irene Clarice Richards. It was her second marriage as well. In 1928, the death of his first child, daughter Mona, sent him into a state of depression, and for a time he thought about cutting back on his business activities and returning home to New Brunswick. But his daughter Anne was born in 1926, which provided him with much joy. Anne was born in London, and she became an artist. She spent her childhood and received early education in Canada and England, and studied arts at the Chelsea School of Art under Graham Sutherland and Henry Moore, continuing at the Angelo French Art Center in London with Fernand Leger in Paris. She is currently 94 years old and has a successful art career. Dunn and his second wife divorced in 1942, following which he married his longtime personal secretary, Marcia Anastasia Christofords. 36 years his junior, Christopher, as she was nicknamed, was very bright, intensely loyal, and a devoted partner. It was during the war that Dunn had two major health crises brought on by old age. These required hospital stays of up to 17 days and 5 weeks, respectively. Christopher was by his side each day and night and was successful in keeping the press away from these troubles. Shortly after, all these health troubles seemed to be resolved. Dunn divorced his wife and married Christofords. Dunn would seek her input on almost every business matter for the rest of his life. I truly believe they lived a happy life together. Now let's talk about the luxury, social life, and lifestyle of Sir James Dunn. Although a workaholic, Dunn enjoyed luxury and maintained an active social life. He was one of the first businessmen to acquire a Douglas DC-3 as a private business aircraft, which the couple used to travel frequently between homes in Europe and Canada. He had a place in London, England, a villa in France, a camp near his birthplace in New Brunswick, and a home in Wawa, nicknamed the Eagle's Nest. He kept a vast wine cellar from vineyards of France and frequented New York City, especially Broadway, where he was friends with television host Ed Sullivan. He was known to have food delicacies flown from Montreal if he was able to get them at his home in St. Andrews, New Brunswick. He was a man who wasn't afraid to show his wealth, owning cars ranging from Morris Minor to a Rolls Royce. They attended events like the coronation of Queen Elizabeth in June 1953. Lady Dunn was in a tiara, a beautiful gown, and all the jewels for this event. Sir James Dunn was also an avid art collector for many years. He was introduced to this pastime by Van Huren in 1908 and purchased 3 paintings by Goya before 1911 and of Velázquez by 1912. Dunn was pained when he was forced to liquidate his art collection in 1914, like I mentioned. The transaction included 13 paintings, including a Holbein, a Bronzino, a Manet, and El Greco. Dunn commissioned several portraits of participants at the Versailles Conference by Sir William Orpen. At the height of the Depression, he also commissioned another dozen at this time for his friends like Lord Greenwood, Lord Castlerose, and Lord Beaverbrook. Do I ever wish I could commission portraits by the world's most accredited artists and gift them all to my friends? But my favorite discovery of Dunn's and his life was the fact that Dunn and his last wife had 3 paintings done by Salvador Dali. In fact, they even developed a relationship. How does one create a relationship with Salvador Dali while working in Sault Ste. Marie? I'm not too sure, but it's evident they did. I'm sure with the couple's luxury travels across Europe, a network of the world's wealthiest, most powerful people helped them foster this relationship. But let me describe these paintings. The first one was commissioned in 1949, and it's the portrait of Sir James Dunn. It is a 132 centimeter by 90 centimeter oil on canvas painting. Dunn sits on a stone throne wearing a gold robe, looking off into the blue skies of a warm climate European coast. It's exquisite. It's exquisite and really depicts Dali's unique style. Equestrian fantasy was the next portrait, but of Lady Dunn. You guessed it, regally sitting side saddle on a horse. She's holding a bird, and it features a small rabbit in the corner of the canvas. This painting is the only one of Lady Dunn, and it was completed in 1954. The last painting of this collection is dated a year later, titled Sunrise, Sir James Dunn. It depicts beautifully swirling clouds in the morning glow, with the classic pose of Dunn, arms crossed with a gentle smile. We have a portrait of Dunn in our collection here at the Sioux Museum that mimics the same pose. It was hung somewhere in Algoma Steel's empire before given to us. But back to the Dahlia paintings, all three of them are now in the Beaverbrook Art Gallery in New Brunswick, amongst one of Dahlia's most famous pieces titled St. James the Great, completed in 1957, also on permanent display. This one is a lot larger than the rest of these paintings, at 13 feet tall. James the Great was one of the 12 apostles of Jesus. According to the New Testament, he was the second of the apostles to die and the first to be martyred. St. James was the patron saint of Spain, which makes sense as Dahlia is from Figures, Spain. This painting is affiliated with Dunn and in his collection at the Beaverbrook, so I'm not sure what Dunn's true relation with it is. If he had it in his possession or it just simply hangs with the rest of his own paintings in his hometown. Beaverbrook is the name of this gallery in New Brunswick, but this character has a significant role in Dunn's story. He more commonly is known by Lord Beaverbrook. Lord Beaverbrook and Sir James Dunn were lifelong best friends. Their relationship started as young boys, and their paths intertwined in their roads to riches and stayed very close throughout the years, especially during their time in England, where they were each other's connections to home, as he was also born in New Brunswick. Beaverbrook was a millionaire too, all by the young age of 30. Beaverbrook's life accomplishments include, but are not limited to, being a Canadian-British newspaper publisher and backstage politician who was an influential figure in British media and politics of the first half of the 20th century. His base of power was the largest circulation newspaper in the world, the Daily Express, which appealed to the conservative working class with intensely patriotic news and editorials. During the Second World War, he played a major role in mobilizing industrial resources as Winston Churchill's Minister of Aircraft Production. Winston and Beaverbrook created a loyal friendship. In 1911, he was knighted by King George, and he established the Canadian War Memorials Fund and wrote and published several books in his lifetime. When Sir James Dunn died, Beaverbrook actually wrote a book about Dunn's life and published it in 1961. Dunn passed in January 1956 at the age of 81 after a heart ailment at his home in St. Andrews, New Brunswick. The book shared the work and glamour that was his life, way more lavish than I ever expected when hearing the name of a local high school here in Sault Ste. Marie. While Lord Beaverbrook wrote the book, he may have took on the protagonist character of Sir James Dunn maybe a little literally. He later remarried none other than Lady Dunn herself, known as Christopher, Sir James Dunn's last wife. Clearly, Dunn and Beaverbrook had a very close relationship, and Beaverbrook took care of Lady Dunn in his last year, because he only lived another year longer. Before he passed, he made sure to honor her with a Lady Dunn Hall at the University of New Brunswick and also a health center named after Lady Dunn in Wawa. Lady Dunn also wrote a book in honor of her late husband, even before Beaverbrook. The Ballad of a Bathurst Boy, it was called, from 1974 to 1956. Printed by the University of New Brunswick Press in Fredericton, New Brunswick, it was sent to friends and family of Dunn only. Lady Dunn eventually passed in October 1994 at the age of 85. But Sir James Dunn's legacy runs deep in the Sioux and beyond. As a result of the very substantial taxes on the estate left by Sir James Dunn, as well as Nova Scotia's Isaac Walton Callum, who died the year before in 1955, the Government of Canada was able to create and provide an endowment for the Canadian Council for the Arts. There's also a list of 19 foundations, buildings, ships, and academic chairs that bore his name. And of course, Sir James Dunn Collegiate and Vocational School was one of them. The school opened in 1957 and was the third high school of the city of Sault Ste. Marie, with the mascot, the eagle. Not sure the eagle's significance to Dunn, but like I mentioned, his home in Wawa was named the Eagle's Nest too. So if anyone knows, let me know. Not only was the school named after a significant person in Sault Ste. Marie's history, but in those halls walked many influential people that the Sioux is so very proud of. Dr. Roberta Bondar, the first Canadian female astronaut and first neurologist in space. Wayne Gretzky, Canadian professional hockey player and coach. The band Trouble Charger, formed at Sir James Dunn by students Greg Norrie, Bill Priddle, Rosie Martin, and Richard McGullen. Cale Matson, Juno-nominated singer and songwriter, and so many more. Sir James Dunn Collegiate and Vocational School was often recognized in the community for leading music, arts, and athletic programs, having won many local sports championships and arts and music competitions. But eventually, in fall 2010, Sir James Dunn and Bowading Collegiate and Vocational Schools were combined at the Sir James Dunn location for 1 year to form the temporary new high school, Superior Heights. Then in fall 2011, the new school was finally opened on the old Bowading site called Superior Heights Collegiate and Vocational School. Sir James Dunn School was then demolished in 2016. The property is now just a field with little to no evidence that Sir James Dunn School was there and its past stories. But if you are interested in walking down memory lane in an untraditional way, you can watch the 2016 film The Void, as it was filmed in the Sioux, entirely on location at the Dunn before its demise. So with that all said, I hope you learned a little something new about Sault Ste. Marie history and the people that influenced it. Come back again next week to learn about the amazing people that live here today and are making this community a greater place. Ciao for now. If you enjoyed this episode, you might like our blog too. Head over to our website, Sioux Museum, that's SAULT museum.ca, and look under Discover. You will find our blog, Museum Musings. We share short synopsis of influential people, historic places, and impactful events in our history. Pictures are always included, and you will be sure to learn a little something new with each post.